There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from peace. It comes from resignation. You signed a contract with it long ago, quietly, without words. Maybe you were too young to understand what you were agreeing to. Maybe you were just tired of feeling out of place in your own skin. But somewhere between your first fall and your most recent relapse, you made a pact with something that only pretended to comfort you. The screen, the release, that temporary escape you called relief, but it never really relieved you. It just muted the ache long enough for you to breathe again. And that became the habit. You were never chasing lust. That's the lie they sold you. What you were chasing was the brief illusion of control, the moment where nothing else existed. No past, no pressure, no unfinished conversations echoing in your head. You didn't want pleasure. You wanted pause, a break from the inner collapse you were too ashamed to name. You called it a routine. You told yourself it was harmless, but deep down you felt it. This wasn't habit. This was hunger, and not the kind that feeds on bodies, the kind that feeds on the parts of you that no one ever asked about. Zeno lost everything in a shipwreck, his wealth, his security, his future as he knew it. But in that ruin, he found philosophy. Not because he wanted to be wise, but because he had nothing left to protect. That's the kind of man who walks through fire and starts listening to silence. And maybe your loss of control is that shipwreck. Maybe your streaks and relapses aren't about counting days. They're about counting the distance between the man you became and the man you were supposed to be. There's an illusion you've been holding on to, that this is just a habit, that it's about biology, impulse, boredom. But if you've ever closed that browser and still felt hollow, you know it runs deeper. It's not physical, it's emotional. And more than that, it's philosophical. It reflects a fractured command system inside you, a place where your desires outrank your values, where your comfort outruns your clarity. Chrysippus once said that mastery isn't about constant resistance, but about redefining what's worth wanting. You've been resisting the wrong things, and wanting the ones that never gave you back your weight. Men don't chase pleasure, they chase disconnection. From pressure, from shame, from that silent, painful realization that they've become strangers to their own presence. The world never gave you space to ask why the craving keeps coming back, why your body remembers what your heart tried to forget, why the guilt doesn't stop even when the screen goes black. And so you buried it, like most men do, in silence, in strength, in isolation dressed up as self-control. But NoFap, done right, isn't about streaks. It's not about discipline for discipline's sake. It's about confrontation, honest, quiet, private confrontation with the thing you've been using to avoid rebuilding your emotional core. Not the addiction, not the urge, but the truth you've been dodging. That something inside you gave up on being whole, that you've confused numbness with calm, and that somewhere, beneath the shame and the pattern, you still remember what it felt like to be present. This journey isn't loud, it won't impress anyone. It won't trend, it won't reward you with applause, but it will show you, day by silent day, that your worth has nothing to do with your urges and everything to do with how you hold yourself when they return. This is not abstinence, it's not performance, it's reclamation of your gaze, your breath, your voice, your dignity. And in that quiet reclaiming, something breaks, not you, but the agreement you made with your own absence. And that's where the real work begins. Every man remembers the first time he escaped into it, not because of what he saw, but because of what he didn't have to feel. It wasn't about the image. It wasn't even about the act. It was about the silence that followed, that 5-second window where guilt hadn't arrived yet, that fragile space where, for just a moment, the weight inside your chest felt manageable. But that urge, what you've called addiction, habit, weakness, it was never truly about sex. It was about erasing yourself, temporarily. It was about stepping outside your own skin without having to explain why you needed to. The craving isn't for pleasure, it's for invincibility. That moment when the world fades and nothing touches you, when no one's expectations, no one's disappointments, not even your own reflection, can reach you. And that, more than anything, became your fix. Not the body on the screen, but the disappearance, the vanishing of your emotional weight, your childhood echoes, your manhood questions. Every time you gave in, you weren't indulging, you were vanishing, quietly, without witness. There's a loop you've been caught in, one deeper than dopamine. Yes, there's chemistry, but there's also a kind of emotional malnutrition at play. Structure was never offered to you as safety. It was given as punishment, control, or threat. So when adulthood came, You built your own rituals, not to grow, but to survive. You used fantasy as medicine. You used screens as therapy. And somewhere along the way, your body learned, this is how we cope. This is where we run. This is what silence feels like when no one's home. Zeno knew about ridicule. He knew about being laughed at, about walking into spaces that didn't respect the quiet within him. But he didn't escape it. He shaped it, not into revenge, not into performance, but into philosophy. You were never taught that kind of silence. Yours came from emotional neglect, from rooms where your feelings were inconvenient, from adults who taught you to shut down, not show up. So you adapted. You made yourself small where you should have stood tall. And when the emptiness grew too loud, you found a way to mute it. Modern men regulate their identity through artificial highs, not because they're weak, but because no one handed them the tools to sit with their truth. Screens became the new father, the new mother, the new validation, and slowly your sense of self began to orbit something that gave you nothing in return, just a flicker, then shame, then the loop again. But here's the quiet truth beneath it all. You were never broken, just unrecognized, and every urge that rises isn't asking to be resisted. It's asking to be understood. It's pointing to the parts of you that still believe escape is safer than embodiment, that pleasure is easier than presence, that disappearing hurts less than being seen. And until you sit with that, until you look it in the eye without flinching, it will keep returning, not as temptation, but as the only language your inner silence still speaks. You've seen the posts, the numbers, day 4, day 17, day 63, like a scoreboard for self-worth, like each number somehow makes you more solid, more disciplined, more respectable. But numbers don't change identity, they only count time, and time, without clarity, doesn't heal, it just passes. That's the trap, the illusion that 90 days is a finish line, that counting somehow makes you clean. But real change doesn't show up in digits. It shows up in the man you are when no one is looking. What you're really doing during those 90 days isn't resisting. You're rebuilding. Quietly, painfully, without applause. You're stepping back into a house you once abandoned, the house of your own mind. And it's not a challenge, it's a war. Not loud, not chaotic, but precise, internal, constant. You're not fighting temptation. You're confronting the version of you that needed it, the one that survived through escape, through fantasy, through delay. And every day you show up, without needing to perform, without needing to count, is a day that version of you starts to dissolve. Counting days can become a prison. It shifts your attention from who you're becoming to how far you've gone. It turns recovery into performance, and performance is fragile. It breaks the moment no one's watching. That's why you feel the pressure after a streak, not because you're healing, but because you're performing. And when your ego is built on performance, even success feels hollow. You don't need a scoreboard. You need correction. Quiet, daily, stoic correction, like Marcus Aurelius, who didn't count his discipline. He practiced it. Without noise, without metrics, just return, again and again. Neuroplasticity doesn't celebrate you. It just rewires you. Slowly, impersonally, but powerfully. It gives your brain back to you, not through force, but through repetition, through presence, through subtraction. When the noise fades, your system stops hijacking itself. The circuits stop chasing validation. The chemicals stop looping the same false high. And what you're left with is baseline, not victory, not euphoria, just the man you were before the noise. NoFap isn't a feat, it's a reintroduction to your own masculine clarity, to your own stability, to the quiet inside your bones that doesn't need to prove anything. You don't finish at day 90. You bury something. You bury the version of you who needed to track time just to feel in control. The man who thought abstinence was the goal, when presence was the real prize. This journey isn't for men who want to win. It's for men who want to return. Return to discipline that doesn't need an audience. Return to power that doesn't spike. It steadies. Return to a self that doesn't perform. He leads silently. This is not a challenge. It's a return to the man who never should have been lost. You thought you wanted her curves, her voice, her attention, but that wasn't the addiction. What you kept returning to wasn't her body. It was the echo of something older, something quieter, something you didn't know how to name. Because it wasn't about her. It never was. You were chasing the presence of something you lost before you understood what it meant to be a man, the nurturing you never received, the emotional validation you never knew you needed, the safety of being seen without being judged. You were looking for her in symbols, in screens, in silence that never gave you back your center. Porn doesn't offer sex. It offers symbolism. It offers an illusion of power without vulnerability, connection without cost. It mimics closeness while keeping you completely alone. And that's why it cuts so deep. It doesn't just hijack your lust. It hijacks your emotional language. It tells you this is what intimacy feels like. This is what being desired looks like. This is how you fill the ache you never spoke out loud. But what you were addicted to was never real. It was a projection of your hunger, of your loss, of the invisible wound no one ever stopped to notice. There's a wound that lives in men who were emotionally starved but never allowed to say so. A mother wound, a father absence, a household where your body grew up but your soul went cold. And in that coldness, you reached, not for love, but for fantasy, not for connection, but for proof that you were still desirable, still powerful, still wanted. And that's what the feminine energy in porn pretends to give you. Power without presence, comfort without accountability. But she was never there. Not really. You were alone, every single time. Zeno's Stoic detachment wasn't apathy. It wasn't coldness. It was perception without absorption. The ability to see clearly without becoming entangled. That's what you've been missing. Not love, but clarity. Every time you surrendered to the screen, you didn't just release tension. You abandoned your masculine polarity. You stepped out of presence and into passivity. Not because you were weak, but because you were wounded. And for too long, no one taught you that your presence was enough. True attraction doesn't begin where lust ends. It begins where projection dissolves. When you stop seeing women as medicine for your pain and start seeing yourself as the man who no longer needs to be rescued. Not by their approval, not by their energy, not by the illusion that their body will heal what your silence kept hidden. Until you face that, you'll keep returning, not to her, but to the ghost you mistook for her. This isn't about rejection. It's about return, to stillness, to sovereignty, to the man who no longer chases reflections, but stands rooted in who he is, without needing her energy to feel whole again. Not every relapse happens in front of a screen. Some happen in boardrooms, in gyms, in late-night scrolling disguised as productivity. They wear the mask of control, overwork, overtraining, perfectionism. They look like growth. They sound like discipline, but they're escape, dressed in acceptable clothing. Because once you stop medicating with lust, the craving doesn't vanish. It mutates. It shifts into other addictions, ones the world praises, ones that keep you busy, distracted, and still distant from yourself. You think you've healed because you've stayed away from porn. But healing isn't subtraction alone. It's awareness. And too often, men mistake performance for presence. They swap one escape for another. The hustle, the grind, the obsession with results. These are the new relapses. Silent, socially rewarded, and emotionally hollow. You end your day exhausted, but untouched. You feel successful, but disconnected. You've traded the screen for status, but you're still running. Zeno didn't build strength through more. He built it through less, through simplification, through the art of knowing what not to pursue. He didn't numb himself with excess effort. He refined himself through precision, through stillness. And that's what most men miss. They replace lust with ambition and call it recovery. But if that ambition silences your core, you're still lost. You're just better dressed while drifting. There is a kind of masculine relapse that looks exactly like leadership, until you're alone. Then it's just noise, empty victories, an apartment filled with trophies but no peace. And you don't talk about it because this kind of relapse earns applause. People think you figured it out, but deep down, your soul knows. You're not here. You're performing. For them, for her, for the part of you that still doesn't believe stillness is safe. True healing isn't an addition, it's subtraction. Of excess, of distractions, of anything that demands you abandon your inner silence just to feel alive. You think you're moving forward, but if every step is driven by avoidance, you're only circling the same wound. This chapter of your life isn't about speed. It's about precision, about choosing fewer things, but with your full presence. The masculine return isn't loud. It's not a before and after photo. It's a quiet refusal to chase, to explain, to hide in noise. And once you understand that, every moment becomes a test, not of strength, but of clarity, of whether you can stay rooted when nothing is distracting you from yourself. That's the real work, and it begins when the screen is off, the room is quiet, and all you have left is your own gaze in the mirror. There's a pain that hits harder than failure. It's the pain of getting close, the pain of almost, of standing at the edge of your own victory and walking away from it, not because you wanted to, but because something inside you still didn't believe you deserved to finish. Day 89 feels heavier than day 1, because by then, it's not just about the act, it's about identity, about what it means to almost become the man you said you would be, and then disappear again. You don't just break a streak, you bury a version of yourself you were starting to trust. You mourn him, quietly, without a funeral, and that's why the relapse cuts so deep. It isn't just the guilt, it's the grief, the inner fracture that whispers, you were almost there. You didn't just lose momentum, you lost part of your emerging self-respect. And in its place, a familiar shadow returned, one that doesn't scream, one that doesn't punish. It just stands in the room and waits for you to shrink back into who you used to be. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "To keep yourself upright, not be held upright." That's the lesson most men never learn. To rise without needing reminders, to stand without leaning on the fear of failure. If your discipline is built on fear, it will collapse under pressure. But if it's built on inner posture, on clarity, not countdowns, then even a relapse can become realignment. Even the fall becomes a lesson in balance. Not a sentence of shame. Shame, when carried rightly, isn't your enemy. It's a marker, a signal that something sacred inside you wants to come home, not to a number, but to a deeper self-possession. You were never meant to count days. You were meant to count moments of presence, of sovereignty, of quiet choices made when no one was watching. That's what the streak was trying to show you. Not that you could resist, but that you could remember who you are without needing to escape him. There's a symbolic fire every man walks through. It burns false pride. It burns ego. It burns the illusion that healing is linear, predictable, clean. But if you stay in the fire, if you stop running from the parts of you that still ache, you'll reach something more sustainable than pride. You'll find integrity, not the kind people praise, the kind that lives in your breath, in your solitude, in the still voice that whispers, "I don't need to start over. I just need to return." You didn't lose because you relapsed. You only lose if you believe the man who rose for 89 days no longer exists. He does. And the path forward isn't about proving anything. It's about remembering what that man stood for and why he was never doing it for a number in the first place. Most men think this journey is about control, about managing urges, about taming something wild. But if that's all you get from NoFap, you've missed the deeper shift. Because the real change isn't in your desire, it's in your presence, in the way you enter a room, in the way your energy no longer leaks, in the stillness that starts to live behind your eyes. Your libido isn't the problem. Your absence was. There comes a point where the body catches up to the soul. Your voice lowers, not out of aggression, but out of alignment. Your gaze steadies, not to intimidate, but because you no longer search for approval. The nervous energy disappears, the overcompensation fades, and what remains is presence. Not loud, not performative, just grounded, clean, complete. Not because you added anything, but because you stopped leaking yourself into illusions. Presence is not force. It's not tension. It's not dominance. It's the absence of chaos. And when you stop chasing artificial highs, your nervous system recalibrates. Your breathing slows. Your instincts sharpen. You no longer live half a second behind your life. You begin to feel things in real time. That's not just biology. It's emotional timing. And every time you say no to the old loop, you're saying yes to something deeper, to a version of you that doesn't react but responds, that doesn't seek but selects. Zeno led through calmness. He didn't overpower. He didn't posture. He didn't command attention. He anchored it. That's what your presence becomes when the fog clears. An anchor in a world that's constantly moving, constantly performing, constantly asking men to be louder, faster, harder. You become the quiet center, the man who doesn't need to prove, because he knows. This isn't about abstinence. It's about clarity, about the quiet, sacred work of removing distractions that dilute your being. And in that space, something ancient returns, not an achievement, not an edge, but a kind of power that isn't built. It's uncovered. It was always there, buried beneath the chaos. And now, without noise, without need, it speaks again, through your tone, your eyes, your walk, through the fact that, finally, you are here, fully, quietly, completely. There's a kind of power that doesn't speak. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need affirmation. It's the power that forms in silence. The kind of silence that doesn't come from emptiness, but from containment. That's what NoFap begins to teach you, beneath the surface. Not just how to abstain, but how to hold, how to carry, how to return to a place inside you that never needed to be explained to be felt. You become visible not by raising your voice, but by withholding it, by letting your presence say what your words used to try to prove. The world taught you that masculinity was about expression, that power was about command. But Stoic masculinity doesn't command, it contains. It doesn't chase attention, it creates gravity. And the longer you stay off the loop, the more that energy returns. Not because you're doing more, but because you're leaking less. You start to feel it before you see it. The way people pause before speaking to you, the way rooms respond to your calm, the way women stop trying to read you and start feeling drawn to something they can't quite explain. That's not game. That's not strategy. That's alignment. That's what happens when your energy stops scattering and starts consolidating. You stop broadcasting need. You stop performing hunger. You start holding your own ground without trying to be seen. Epictetus said to speak only what improves the silence. But what if your energy followed the same rule? What if your presence became so clean, so rooted, that it didn't just speak, it shifted space? That's not mystery. That's maturity. That's the man who no longer uses women, noise, or stimulation to remind himself he exists. Masculine magnetism isn't taught. It's remembered. And it begins in silence, in how you sit, in what you withhold, in the pauses between your actions. You don't have to advertise your streak. You don't have to explain your path. The people meant to feel you will, because it's not your abstinence they sense. It's the return of your edge, your discernment, your weight. And that speaks louder than anything you could ever say. You didn't complete 90 days. You outlived the man who needed to, the one who counted streaks because he didn't yet trust his own silence. The one who thought the goal was abstinence, when all along it was presence. What you buried wasn't just an addiction. It was a self you had outgrown, quietly, without ceremony, without anyone needing to know. Zeno lost everything at sea, but the shipwreck wasn't the end. It was the unmasking, the violent clarity that comes when there's nothing left to protect and everything left to build. Your own wreck may not have looked like his. It didn't need to, but the outcome can be the same. A man stripped of illusion, walking toward what matters, one step at a time, with fewer words and clearer weight. Seneca once compared a man to an archer, not one obsessed with hitting the target, but one whose power lies in the steadiness of his hand before the release. That's what you've built. Not perfection, not immunity, but steadiness. You've learned to hold your aim without needing reward, to sit with the tension without running from it. That's not recovery, that's reconstruction. Because this was never about avoiding a behavior. It was about facing a truth, that the way you soothe yourself is the way you define yourself. And when a man changes how he soothes, he changes how he stands. This wasn't a challenge. It was a right. Not to prove that you could abstain, but to reveal that you no longer need to disappear. You're not here to win a streak. You're here to become a man whose silence is no longer a hiding place, but a source of presence. A man who no longer counts days, because he's counting something else now. The moments he showed up fully, without escape, without noise, without apology, just him, finally, unbroken, unafraid, unmasked.